I saw another cancellation of an EV battery plant,
Hmm.
on, I guess it was on Wednesday this week. You know, I
Yeah,
mean, that's not going very many places, and we've committed 50 whatever plus $1 billion there.
yeah,
And
yeah.
these companies outside of Canada, it's not political. It's they're just saying the opportunity isn't there. So I'm looking at something maybe we should be putting our energy behind, our money and energy and expertise behind, is the nuclear.
Listen, make no mistake, we are a tier one nuclear nation. That puts us in the company of, you know, great powers like France and like the USA. And why are we a tier one nuclear nation? Usually that involves having nuclear weapons, right? A
Yeah.
nuclear weapon and civilian capability. It's because we designed our own reactor. It's a world class reactor. It's the third most widely deployed nuclear reactor in the world, the can do. And that means we have incredible capabilities right across the fuel cycle, from the uranium we mine, the natural uranium that we manufacture into fuel bundles, all the capabilities, engineering capabilities to troubleshoot not just our domestic, but a global fleet of CANDU reactors.
I've been following the work of Chris Keefer. You might know him as president of Canadians for Nuclear Energy here, but well, for nuclear. But he's also a staff emergency physician at St. Joseph's Health Center. Chris, first of all, great to get a chance to chat again. And I was sort of thinking in anticipation of this that we should got to take a moment and say you've got to have a victory lap, because what a different environment that you created with others for nuclear energy globally, but also in Canada. I mean, it's been a remarkable success, a remarkable testimony to how one individual can sort of get dedicated and make something happen for the public good.
Oh, it's very kind of you to say. Certainly, there is a great man theory of history, which I think is rightly challenged. I've been part of a much broader effort, and as we've seen, there's been a real global turnaround in nuclear energy. But yes, we have to remember that the Trudeau government was adamantly opposed, certainly with Stephen Guilbeault, Green Jesus, as he's known, as the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. It was an uphill battle, and
Yeah.
I'm very proud of the role that we played lobbying both federally and provincially, where there's been some big announcements just today, even.
Well, I'm going to get to a little bit of what's happening now, but first, how long have you been at this? I mean, come on, you're an emergency room physician, and all of a sudden you're spending huge amounts of time. If you had spare time, this is where it went. How long have you been doing that, and why did you start?
Well, it's a very easy answer for me to remember because my son was born 6 years ago, and that's when I got interested. Frankly, I have this, framework of triage, which comes from emergency medicine, and basically the idea is to
Mhm.
identify the most pressing problem and mobilize limited time and resources to get it done. And when my son was born, I started expanding my time horizons out to the next 80 years, and a number of issues came to mind, and nuclear presented this really fascinating solution to a bunch of the problems that I think his generation will face in their lifetime. So it's just been a kind of steady march from there. But 6 years, I can say confidently. His birthday was just last month.
Well, and what a change in just that. Well, relatively speaking, that's a short period of time because, as you said, when you first got involved, I mean, much of the Green lobby had been very successful in squashing nuclear. I mean, France didn't expand, Germany closed them down. I mean, still shaking my head over that one, given they didn't have any alternative and backup power, and it's still costing them, not just dollars and cents, but jobs, et cetera. And what a change now. What was the big obstacle to begin with? And I've got a couple of follow-ups to that.
Sure, sure. I mean, it's interesting referencing Europe, where it's truly insane what they have done and what they are doing, given their precarious energy situation. I mean, they have deposits of coal in Germany. Coal's not really cool anymore, but they don't have much in the way of natural gas. Those big North Sea fields and the Dutch fields are depleted. And the kind of hubris they had to shut down this baseload, reliable, already built, fully paid off nuclear plants is truly the epitome of irresponsibility. In the US, it's a little more understandable. And we have to remember there was big talk of a nuclear renaissance in the early 2000s. That's before the shale revolution, when they were building LNG import facilities, if you can believe that. The US now the number one exporter of LNG in the world. What a different situation. I mean, gas was hitting $15 per million BTUs on Henry Hub. And unfortunately, those ultra cheap gas prices really snuffed what was a really promising nuclear renaissance. There were over 14 combined construction and operating license issued, big plans for building a lot of big nuclear plants. And unfortunately, I would say that the shale revolution, more than anything, dealt a temporary blow to the North American nuclear industry.
Do you think, and again, this is me, you're living this full time, but I've wondered if the German nuclear experience, which means we shut down plants, we did not have backup, we had to rely on Russia. Then you have, of course, the war with Ukraine, huge jump in energy prices. All of that, or some of that, at least in a significant way, could have been prevented if they just kept those nuclear plants going. And it just seemed that to me provided some impetus, at least. You know what? We better or the public said, we're rethinking this. We don't need you. We're going to rethink this because my power bill just went crazy.
Like, don't forget that Germany was 25% nuclear powered. And this is German engineering. These
Mhm.
were some of the best operated and maintained nuclear plants in the world, right? And so, again, it's utter madness. And we've seen Germany suffers from, they have a word for it. It's called the Dunkelflaute. And
Yeah.
basically, it means the winter doldrums, no sun, no wind. And they built over 100 gigawatts of wind and solar. They had a traditional power system that was about 100 gigawatts. They've had to maintain that because, hey, there's Dunkelflaute. Sometimes the wind and
Yeah.
sun don't show up. So they've got this duplication, which is proving to be incredibly, incredibly costly. And they're absolutely failing in their ambitions to, the whole point was to get off fossil fuels, and they're not making much progress there.
Well, what an irony that they became the biggest importer, Germany, importer of coal over the last couple of years, as you say, because they don't have other sources. They're the ones who were supplying the Russian war machine, principally, others too, of course, but by purchasing the gas. And it's just one of the great, someone should be writing, I'm sure they are, several books on, is this the stupidest decision ever made by politicians? Now, there'd be a lot of competition, to be sure, but that would be on the short list.
Listen, when the Germans get a bad idea, unfortunately, they carry it right on through to its extreme. So there is actually hope for a course correction. The CDU, they're a bit on the right wing of German politics. They've
Yep.
said if they form government in a coalition, they will reopen the three most recently shuttered nuclear plants. So that's exciting. But yeah, I mean, Germany's the pretty obvious and easy whipping boy of terrible energy policy. Their energy minister, his big qualification is that he's a children's literature author. So I think what you're pointing at though is this broader trend where we're getting more serious on energy. We've been coasting on the infrastructure of our forefathers and foremothers, to be politically correct, and some of that stuff's starting to wear out, and demand is ticking up, right? With data centers, with the end of easy kind of globalization, we're talking about reshoring strategic industries. Maybe it was a little bit of a mistake to send most of our steel and aluminum production, for example, over to China. Bringing those industries back is going to be energy intensive. And that's something that is happening here in Ontario. We're seeing a lot of investment in these energy intensive industries, and hence this prediction, we'll see if it comes true, of a 75% increase in power demand by 2050.
Well, I look globally also, though. There's been a renaissance in many, many countries. When Japan is opening up nuclear plants, or reopening and committing. But I mean, there's literally dozens and dozens. China comes to mind for me immediately that, they're doing this. Of course, they know their energy demand is going crazy as the population, becomes more middle class or whatever term we want, but their standard of living is rising. We know it's going to happen in Africa. It's going to happen in more places in South America. So the energy demand, as you allude to, is getting. But it's interesting to see the traction that nuclear's got. I mean, that's I'm a big uranium core position person. Like just have some uranium, sit it aside, have a sleep. Phone me in 5 years, kind of thing. So
Yeah,
I track all of that, just thinking, well, where's the uranium going to come from? Oh, good. Prices are going to go up. If I'm an investor, I say, oh, good. But
right.
I look at that global expansion of demand is really significant.
And I think we do find ourselves in a bit of a paradox here. There's unprecedented social and political license behind nuclear, but the state of the Western nuclear industry is in shambles. I'd say Ontario's, a proud exception to that rule, given the activity that our nuclear sector has maintained right from the 1950s to present. And that has a lot to do, actually, for example, in the States with what I'll call financial engineering. We've been
Mhm.
doing a lot of nuclear engineering solutions to a financial engineering problem. And this is how the Chinese are doing it. I mean, low cost capital, uh, low cost bonds. The cost of capital is everything, not just for nuclear, but any big
Yeah.
mega project, building bridges, building big transmission lines, etc. And the West has really got to get its act back together on this. And again, I'm glad to be talking to a finance guy here. That's gonna take some really creative thinking.
Well, and it's, to me, it's got the potential. They can still screw this up. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
you and your group and others like yourself has put it on the forefront of acceptability. That was the key. We had to overcome that. I think it's almost a given now that if you want clean energy at the level that you were alluding to, we're now more aware of the demands of AI, and we've been made, aware of that by Amazon, Microsoft, all of those. But it's not like we're out of the woods yet. And I'm going to come back to a couple other things on that, but just broadly speaking, they can still screw this up.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, the Western nuclear industry has really drunk way too much of its own Kool-Aid. Just 10 years ago, I'd say, in terms of that first nuclear renaissance I was mentioning, where the US was feeling a real energy security imperative. We're running out of natural gas. It's
Mhm.
too expensive. Pre-shale revolution. 14 combined construction operating license issued, all for big boys, large reactors, gigawatt plus. And then after that fracking boom, we have this emergence of the SMR paradigm. And, if economies of scale apply to any area, it's nuclear, because you have these fixed costs, right? You have shielding costs, you have civil works costs, you have regulation and licensing costs, security costs. The list goes on and on and on. And that all favors large reactors. And and it's incredible the way the industry has irresponsibly spread what I think is frankly a delusion. In order to sort of preserve itself, it's hyped up this SMR idea, and we're really seeing the kind of wins in the sales of the SMR hype train starting to lag. The DOE's pathways to commercial liftoff report acknowledged clearly SMRs are more expensive on a megawatt in terms of the construction and a megawatt hour basis. It's clear.
I think your point, though, is incredibly important because we've been mired in this. Let's just talk about stuff, no matter what, in the energy, virtue signaling, et cetera. But if we want to get down to practical, all of a sudden we started to hear about small nuclear reactors, and as we don't have to think about anyone else. I sort of suspected at that time, by the way, Chris, with no validate, nothing more than anecdotal, but that was to appease opponents to some degree. Oh, it's just small. Oh, don't worry. We
Yeah.
have nuclear reactors in submarines. We can just pull that out and put it in your home or power 20,000. But your point's key. I mean, finances do matter, and
Yeah.
economies of scale and all of the overlap. Like, because I'm building a smaller nuclear reactor doesn't mean I don't have the same regulatory challenges,
Mhm.
costs, inspections. That's important to know. So what's our output? So you need these big plants if you're going to have it on a more cost effective basis. And I see very few people talking about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I get in trouble for talking about it all the time
Mm.
because, the unwritten word here is thou shalt not, talk critically within this industry. I'm one of the biggest proponents. But yeah, it's exactly what you're saying, because all of these fixed costs do not scale down
Yeah.
proportionately to the huge drop in reactor output. I mean, there's an example that we have with the BWRX 300 that we're building or planning to build at the Darlington station here in Ontario, where the civil works are barely shrinking, right? But the reactor output's so much lower. So this whole promise of we're going to build it all in factories and do less work on site actually doesn't come true, because proportionately you've got way more civil works to build. So you do more of that inefficient work on site. And again, it's a marketing term. That
Yes.
that design is not yet modular. The BWX 300 is not yet modular. They say maybe once we get to fifth of a kind, sixth of a kind, we'll put the design work in to do that. And so again, we've been sold on a term, and it's almost as deceptive as renewables, which includes everything from unreliable wind and solar to reliable hydroelectricity to horribly polluting biomass and wood
Yeah.
chips that we log in Canada and send across to Europe. So we need to be precise in our language, and we need to get back to first principles and basics. And I think, again, economies of scale is huge here. I will say one thing. One of the key rationales behind SMRs was that, okay, they're easier to finance. If we build a smaller chunk, even if it's far less efficient, we'll be able to mobilize the capital and we'll be able to attract private sector capital. And there is something to that. But the social license has changed such that we're starting to see, nuclear's in the green bonds now in Ontario, and that's partially due to our advocacy. But that starts to de-risk capital and suggest, hey, government will be there in some way, shape, or form to drive down the cost of capital and help de-risk these projects so that we can build the economic nuclear that makes sense, which is large reactors.
Where are we at in Canada now? I'm thinking in a positive way in terms a couple of things. We're as you said, there's lots of movement in Ontario, but also an opportunity. I mean, I've always thought this was a massive economic opportunity. They love to say that wind and solar are going to create 2 trillion jobs, or somehow we're going to cap production of oil and that's going to create even more jobs, which is, a puzzling confusion. But in this case, I think correct me is what I'm asking. It looks like we've got the expertise, or we have lot of expertise, a lot of engineering style expertise. We can export that expertise. And I know, we're working on it. We do have partnerships outside of Canada, that, technical partnerships, but it just seems like a massive opportunity because nuclear is being accepted in more and more jurisdictions.
Yeah, no, we do have actually a fixed contract now for exports, 2 new CANDU reactors that have been ordered by Romania. The government of Canada made a large loan through I believe the infrastructure bank, about $3 billion. All of that money will be spent in Canada, stimulating our local supply chain. So there's a big benefit to exports. But getting back to that idea of the expertise that we have, there has been an unbroken chain of activity within our nuclear sector. It's a fabulous story. It goes right back to World War II with Manhattan Project North. We were involved in doing some of the most cutting edge research at that extraordinary period in history. And that left us with incredible capabilities. C.D. Howe, the famous minister of everything, said, we're not going to abandon that wartime investment. We're going to put it to work, but we're going to do it for peaceful purposes. And so in addition to that mobilized, industrialized war economy, which we moved over to civilian applications, we added nuclear to the mix. Here in Ontario, we didn't have coal. We ran out of hydroelectricity, built a bit of coal, but we didn't like being dependent, having to import coal with volatile prices, the Great Lakes freezing over. And so we went nuclear in a big way. We built 20 reactors here in Ontario in just 27 years. And then we went on to export almost a dozen reactors around the world. And that's bringing in ongoing business, as we see with this Romanian deal.
Does that suggest we could reproduce it at that level again, or that pace I'm looking at, as you say? It seems remarkable to build that many reactors, that quickly. Is that scalable now? If we had, I'm not talking about changing the plans and the guys, I'm talking about what we know how to do and doing more of it.
Listen, I'm not going to pull the wool over your eyes. It's a huge challenge. And we were building off a legacy. Again, talking about unbroken activity, Ontario Hydro, this, large, Ontario-owned Crown Corporation that had built a number of hydro dams and then built about 8 gigawatts of coal stations, including the largest coal station in North America at Nanticoke, right? The joke was Ontario Hydro was a construction company that happened to make electricity. So enormous momentum there. And, we're caught up in the present moment, right? In the kind of learn to code generation. And so we've lost a lot of that craft labor and that project management skills. But again, we have an unbroken chain in nuclear. Right now, we're refurbishing our CANDU nuclear fleet, right? Which means we add another 30 to 40 years by restoring the reactor itself, an engine swap, but restoring it to an as new condition. And those are big mega projects. We're talking $3 billion a piece. And we are delivering those projects not just on budget, but ahead of schedule. The most recently refurbished reactor at Darlington, I believe 160 days ahead of schedule. I mean, this is an enormous accomplishment, particularly having to struggle through COVID, right? Which was intensely disruptive of global supply chains. The advantage we have with our Canadian origin, Canadian owned technology of CANDU is that the supply chain is incredibly localized here in Canada. So we were, if not invulnerable, we were very shock-proof to something like the COVID pandemic, which disrupted a lot of big industrial projects around the world.
I'm thinking in terms also that Canada's got reputation, or the CANDU reactor, and the people who are working in that industry have excellent reputations. And I'm coming back to, as you said, I'm a finance guy. I'm coming back to those opportunities that we need. I mean, Canada's had a real decline in capital investment. I mean, that's well chronicled. So this could be a phenomenal opportunity, as you say, pursued with your Romania as an example, but others. And I'm just excited, and I hope the public grasps this. We get, well, I'm not trying to mix apples and oranges, but I saw another cancellation of an EV battery plant,
Hmm.
I guess it was on Wednesday this week. You know, I
Yeah,
mean, that's not going very many places, and we've committed 50 whatever plus $billion there.
yeah,
And
yeah.
these companies outside of Canada, it's not political. They're just saying the opportunity isn't there. So I'm looking at something maybe we should be putting our energy behind, our money and energy and expertise behind, is the nuclear.
Listen, make no mistake, we are a tier one nuclear nation. That puts us in the company of, you know, great powers like France and like the USA. And why are we a tier one nuclear nation? Usually that involves having nuclear weapons, right? A
Yeah,
nuclear weapon and civilian capability. It's because we designed our own reactor. It's a world class reactor. It's the third most widely deployed nuclear reactor in the world, the CANDU. And that means we have incredible capabilities right across the fuel cycle, from the uranium we mine, the natural uranium that we manufacture into fuel bundles, all the capabilities, engineering capabilities to troubleshoot not just our domestic but a global fleet of CANDU reactors. And getting back to the investment decisions at play here, CANDU is extraordinary. Again, that localized supply chain, those high quality middle class jobs for craft labor, engineers, project managers, that is the ultimate economic stimulus. And we see that. There was a great study done on the Darlington refurbishments. For every dollar invested, there was a $1.40 return in GDP activity. And it's the best kind of GDP activity
yeah,
because it's middle class people being paid excellent jobs and going out and spending it in their community. So unparalleled, economic opportunity, and one that creates prosperity for generations. Right? Again, this nuclear investment is the reason why we've been able to keep prices down in Ontario until we went on our renewables, Green
yeah.
Energy Act build out, which jacked up our prices by about 70%.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that book to come out too. I read the Auditor General's report, in those nightmare years, like just
Yeah.
absolutely shocking, but we'll leave that for now. But when you look forward here, and let's say we talk again in 20 years, I'll be dead, so it'll be from the grave, but you're a young man. But what will we see in Canada? Do you think, because look at the progress you've made. I'm not so sure if you would have thought 6 years ago you'd
No.
be this far ahead. That's what I mean. I think there's a positive momentum in terms of understanding. It solves people whose chief concern is climate change, lots of power. People industrial use, lots of power. Low emissions, all of that. So if it's not so much your wish list. What would you actually expect to happen in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, it's hard. It's hard not to be a wishful thinker, but I mean, I think if we do the logical thing, if we follow policy in the national interest, that's going to look a lot like a can-do fleet. Probably 12 new large reactors here in Ontario. Quebec and BC also have large electricity markets that can accommodate large reactors, which again are the economic reactors. They're running out of hydroelectricity. Climate change is having an impact on what was once thought of as a very rock solid, stable source of electricity. Both Quebec and BC really struggling there with big forecasted increase in
Yeah.
demand. And nuclear and hydro are, a dream come true in terms of how they play together in an electricity system. And so, if I were planning it, and certainly what I hope to see again is a large expansion of the CANDU fleet in Ontario, but also new large builds in BC and Quebec. And let's get that export market going again. Again, we're the third most widely deployed nuclear reactor technology in the world, and we're world class. The top performing nuclear reactor between 2011 2021 in that decade was one of those Romanian CANDUs with a capacity factor of 94.5%. So we should be extraordinarily proud, but I think it's part of the Canadian psyche where we're just too humble and we're afraid not to brag, but to seize the opportunities that are provided of this. And I think you see that in business all the time. I mean, there's that great book, Why the Mexicans Don't Drink Molson. Like we just for whatever reason, we don't believe in ourselves.
Uh, let's have one other aspect. I alluded to it earlier, but the uranium side of things, no
Yeah.
matter where we're talking, Canada also has an advantage there. I'm just thinking I just don't see it meeting. I think the demand from nuclear for uranium is going to outstrip the production, which I think provides I don't want to drink my own bathwater, but it provides, an opportunity. So I just want, and don't be afraid. You're not afraid of saying something different. So go ahead and contradict me.
No, it's absolutely the case. We've not been bringing on new production capacity for some time now. I mean, the uranium market is cyclical, but
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing a lot of interest. We're seeing a lot of new power plants coming online. We're also seeing interesting things like the U.S. imposing sanctions on Russian fuel and Russian enrichment
Yes,
services, and now Russia saying, there's all sorts of exemptions, but now Russia's saying, all right, you want to sanction us, we'll sanction you back. I mean, Russia
right.
has 40% of the world's enrichment capacity in terms of all the centrifuges they have there. But you're right. We have an extraordinary advantage here in Canada. We have the world's richest uranium deposits. There's little ore pockets. I've talked to some of the prospectors that are 60% uranium, right?
Wow.
The global average, Kazakhstan, for instance, 0.1% or even lower. So we've got an incredible cost of production. As you know, and as you're well aware, and it's celebrating because of your portfolio, the price of uranium is skyrocketing. But we also, again, have that value add capability here in Canada because we don't have the enrichment capacity, but we can manufacture that uranium oxide into CANDU fuel bundles and put them into our national reactor technology. There's a big value add there. So tons of opportunities. We are at this fork in the road where we're entertaining a number of US origin technologies and actually significantly funding their development. For instance, the GE Hitachi BWX 300 I mentioned. A big chunk of that $1 billion Canada Infrastructure Bank investment is in a privately owned US company's IP, right?
Hmm.
So this is, again, I think, an extraordinary lack of vision and lack of national interest that is just part of this Canadian psyche. And I hope we can have a course correction here to, again, seize the advantage of what gives us that enormous economic multiplier. And that's our national reactor technology, the CANDU.
Let's finish with just a little bit further on that. I've been very positive, right? I'm a big guy, believer in it. Uranium, our own technology. How can they screw this up?
Oh,
Isn't
man.
that a clever question? But how can they screw this up?
Listen, your skepticism is warranted and it is so important, right? Because if this industry gets high on its own supply, drinks too much of its own Kool-Aid, gets too hubristic, yeah, I mean, we see it all over the world with these projects. Look at Europe, look at Hinkley Point, look at Olkiluoto.
Yes.
We're seeing big cost blowouts, right? So, you need to absolutely study the best practices. And I think we've done that in Ontario with these refurbishments. That's not a new build CANDU reactor, but that's a $3 billion project. I mean, I've sat down with the project managers and looked at their critical path and all of the inputs into it that have to be timed perfectly. It's a marvel, truly, of human capability in terms of that project management. So I think we're ready to apply that to this hot supply chain from the CANDU refurbishments to get building. There's opportunities for mistakes, and I'd argue that building small modular reactors in Ontario, where we're talking about a
Yeah.
75% increase in demand, makes zero sense. The only place a small modular reactor makes sense is in a very small grid, an island, maybe Saskatchewan, if they're willing to pay that premium, that economic premium for a smaller reactor. We have a 4,800 megawatt licensed site ready to go, environmental assessment done at Darlington, and we are squandering 3/4 of that licensed capacity on 4 US origin SMR technologies, which are not going to bring that same benefit. So again, we need a real course correction here. We need to be thinking in the provincial interest in Ontario and the national interest, and carefully analyzing best practices, because yes, nuclear is easy to screw up. So we need people like you asking the hard questions, Mike.
Well, as I say, your group has done an absolutely fabulous job. I do think in terms of, I'm a big person on walk the walk, don't talk. We're in a talking sort of generation
Yes.
where virtue signaling helps or leads the way. And then we turn around going, that didn't get it done. And I can, believe me, I can talk till your hair is as gray as mine on those kind of challenges, because that's the norm. You mentioned best practices. My gosh, I'd recommend that for all sorts of government activities. And it seems like, no, it's not on the table. But this is one that you've done a great job, too, explaining. This is a huge opportunity. We've blown other opportunities economically. For a country that has a strong appetite for more government spending in certain areas, well, we need these successes. And I hope I just motivate people. But as I say, for all of the people you're working with as Canadians for Nuclear, my pat in the back, and also please keep it up because you've done a great job. Thanks, Chris.
If I can add just one thing, I mean,
Yes, please.
the other piece of breaking news was Trump's threat, and who knows how real it is, of 25% tariffs on every bit of,
Yes.
technology we import. It's not hard to imagine with the wild card of U.S. protectionism. I mean, JD Vance is a continuation of that Trump legacy, national conservatism, very protectionist. Canada has to learn how to engage intelligently with the U.S. But part of that involves really safeguarding the national interest here. And I think, again, this is another potent argument for CANDU, is this is a technology that we have sovereignty over. So I'll end with that last blast there, Mike.
Well, that's a
Thanks
great,
for entertaining
seriously,
that.
it's a great point that I've read a ton on. Of course, the reaction, I've made comments myself, et cetera. I haven't read that or seen that. It's the kind of thing that evolves as we get further into it, but I couldn't agree more that, of course, we're in the rhetoric stage right now, and I think the president does make statements for effect.
Yeah.
I've read some of his advisors. This is going back a few years, but his advisors, with significant economic background, saying, "Oh, he's just saying that for effect, but also for leverage." This is the guy
Yeah.
who does art of the deal, and part of
Yeah.
that, he's the deal-making president. So that may be part, but you're so right, and we have to be prepared. And I don't think we have been, by the way, but we have to be prepared going forward. And in this area is one that we have to defend. And it's because the opportunity is so great. Anyway,
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been great stuff.
You're welcome, sir. It's great to be back.